A woman stands on a second-floor balcony in the summer of 1942, holding a small rifle and looking down at men pulling weeds in her garden. The garden belongs to a villa. The villa stands inside a concentration camp. The men working below are prisoners, and the balcony was built at her request, so she could sit above them in the afternoon with something cold to drink. Guests have come to visit. Her 3-year-old daughter stands beside her. When she raises the rifle and fires into the group below, the guests watch. According to testimony collected after the war, the child applauds. Her husband commands the Janowska camp in Lviv. His name appears in the SS personnel files, the transfer orders, the post-war investigation reports. She holds no rank. She signs nothing. On paper, she is a housewife and a mother. That is the exact reason she died a free woman. If you want more stories, The Record Almost Lost, subscribe to Veil History and turn on notifications. She was born Elisabeth Riedel in 1913, in the Saarland, a coal and iron region in the west of Germany where the smoke never fully cleared, and the work was hard and badly paid. Her father was a senior foreman, which placed the family a small step above the men he supervised, but no further. She went to a Catholic school and received a basic education. Discipline, church, modest expectations. A future measured in streets her parents had lived on. Her early working life went nowhere. She spent time on a farm. She worked in other people's households. She trained in cooking and domestic management, the standard track for a young working-class woman, with no capital and no connections. Nothing held her. She moved from one position to the next, wages low, prospects flat, and by her early 20s, she was still exactly where she had started. Then the ground shifted under the entire country. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and within a year, Elisabeth Riedel had found work inside the machinery of the new order. She joined the staff of the Nationalsozialistische Zeitung Rheinfront, a Nazi Party newspaper in the region. Understand what that meant for a woman with her background. It was not simply employment. It was entry into a movement that was actively recruiting people like her, people with ambition and no inheritance, people who could be given an identity in exchange for loyalty. The party offered structure, status, and a language that told her that her ordinary life had been stolen from her by enemies. She took all of it. It was in that office that she met Gustav Willhaus. Gustav had built himself inside the party's violent wing. He had joined the SA, the Sturmabteilung, the brown-shirt street force that broke up rival meetings and beat political opponents in the 1920s and early 1930s. Later he moved into the SS, the organization that would grow into the central instrument of policing, terror, and mass killing across occupied Europe. He was not educated. He was not refined. He was known for aggression, and inside that system, aggression was a qualification. Their relationship moved quickly. It was not built on shared tenderness. It was built on a shared calculation. Both of them had looked at Nazi Germany and seen a ladder, and both intended to climb it. In 1935, the Saarland became the center of a political fight, and the Willhaus pair worked both sides of it. The Saar Basin had been placed under League of Nations administration for 15 years by the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War, and a plebiscite was scheduled to decide its future: continued League administration, union with France, or return to Germany. Elisabeth worked the propaganda end, producing and spreading material through the party newspaper. Gustav worked the streets, intimidating opponents by force. When the votes were counted in January 1935, more than 90% chose reunification with Germany, a margin that surprised neutral observers and the Nazi leadership alike. They married in October of that year, before the SS had granted full approval of the match. That detail says something about both of them. They were impatient, and they assumed the system would fall into line behind them. It did. Elisabeth's Catholic background and her family's expectation that children would be raised in the faith were pushed aside. The party demanded total loyalty, and total meant total. Whatever she had absorbed in that Catholic school in the Saarland, she traded it for the future she thought she was buying. In May 1939, after years of trying, their daughter Heike was born. For a few months, the family looked almost conventional. Then, on the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and the Second World War began. For men like Gustav, war was opportunity. He moved into the Waffen-SS, the military branch of the organization, and from there into roles managing forced labor and the administration of occupied territory. His career accelerated. It accelerated because of his brutality, not in spite of it. The system was selecting for exactly what he was. On 22 June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Armies pushed east across enormous distances, cities fell in days, and behind the combat troops came a second apparatus whose purpose was not military victory, but the destruction of entire populations. Lviv, today the largest city in western Ukraine and then under German occupation, was taken that summer. Jewish families were dragged from their homes, beaten in the streets, and forced into ghettos and camps. In November 1941, Gustav Willhaus was transferred to Lviv. He became deputy manager at the local branch of the German Armaments Works, the DA, and with the backing of SS Brigadeführer Fritz Katzmann, commander of SS and police in District Galicia, he was given room to operate. By March 1942, he was commandant of the labor camp for Jews at 134 Janovska Street, in the northwest of the city, adjoining the armaments facility but run separately. He moved into a villa at the center of the camp. In the summer of 1942, his wife and their 3-year-old daughter came to join him there. Consider the geography of that decision. The house sat inside the wire. From the windows, the family could see the roll call ground, the work details, the barracks. There was no version of life in that villa that did not involve looking directly at what was being done to the people outside it. Elisabeth Willhaus lived there for roughly a year, and she did not look away. Conditions in Janowska were designed to kill slowly where they did not kill quickly. Prisoners were assigned pointless work, meant to exhaust them before disease or a bullet finished the job. Some took their own lives rather than continue. Returning work columns were forced to run back through the gate, and Gustav Willhaus and his deputy Friedrich Warzak pulled out the men who showed exhaustion, leaving them between rows of barbed wire until they died. Every morning brought a roll call inspection, and failing it meant immediate execution. Killing at Janowska was not standardized. Each officer had his own habits, his own preferred method, and men and women were murdered for minor infractions, for working too slowly, or for no stated reason at all, with the manner of death depending on the mood of whoever held the weapon. Janowska began as a forced labor site, attached to the armaments works, and grew into something else entirely. It functioned as a labor camp, as a holding point for Jews from Lviv and the surrounding region, and as a killing ground, with a sand pit outside the perimeter used for mass shootings. Estimates of the number who died there run into the tens of thousands. Few prisoners who passed through it survived the war, which is part of why the post-war record depends so heavily on a small number of witnesses. Elisabeth Willhaus built her own reputation inside that place. The first thing she did was renovate. She wanted the villa improved, and she wanted a second-floor balcony added, a space where the family could sit and take refreshments in the afternoon. Jewish prisoners were assigned to her as domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden. From the balcony, she could watch them work. She also used it as a firing position. One Jewish witness described her shooting prisoners for the sport of it. She kept a pistol. Her preferred weapon, though, was a Flobert rifle, a small caliber gun with limited range but enough power at close distance to kill. When visitors came and sat with the family on that balcony, she demonstrated her marksmanship on the people below, and the guests were entertained by it. The documented incidents are specific, and each one was reconstructed from survivor testimony after the war. She fired a single shot at a Jewish laborer walking past the house, while her husband stood beside her on the balcony. On a morning in September 1942, she came out onto the balcony with Gustav and a group of guests and fired into a cluster of prisoners roughly 60 feet away, who were collecting rubbish around the house. One of the men killed was 30 years old, from the town of Sambor, today Sambir in western Ukraine. On a Sunday in April 1943, with her child at her side, she fired into a group of Jewish laborers working in the garden. At least 4 fell where they stood. One of them was Jakob Helfer, from Bubrka, today Biberka, about 30 kilometers or 19 miles southeast of Lviv. That summer she aimed at a group further off inside the camp, prisoners who had gathered together to trade small items among themselves. Around 5 were killed. She shot prisoners during roll call, aiming for the head. Post-war investigators recorded that she also fired at close range into the chests of prisoners sick with typhus. A line used to describe her husband's killing applies equally to her. She killed people as easily as a machine cuts wood. Look at what those incidents have in common. Not one of them was an order. Not one was part of a duty roster or an operational instruction. She was not a guard. She held no post in the camp administration. Every shot she fired was a choice made in an afternoon, in front of her family and her friends, for entertainment. In July 1943, Gustav was reassigned to military service and left the camp. Elisabeth stayed on in Lviv for a period, even as the front line moved closer. When Soviet forces retook the city in July 1944, she fled west and returned to Germany. On 29 March 1945, Gustav Willhaus was killed at Steinfischbach, 60 kilometers or 37 miles northeast of Frankfurt. The war in Europe ended in May. Elisabeth Willhaus was 32 years old, widowed, with a small daughter and no money. She moved in with her family and began putting a life back together in a wrecked country. By 1948, she had remarried, this time to a lawyer, and the two of them opened an automat business. When war crimes investigators located her in 1964, they found that she and her second husband had already come to official attention for petty offenses and business irregularities. The investigators also found witnesses. Survivors described the villa, the balcony, the rifle, the specific mornings, the specific men who fell. None of it was enough. Her role in the Nazi system had never been formalized. She had no rank, no personnel file as a camp employee, no signature on any order, no salary paid by the SS for what she did from that balcony. The documentary trail that convicted so many others simply did not exist for her, because the state had never recognized her as anything other than a commandant's wife. West German courts of that period demanded paper. Testimony from surviving Jewish witnesses, describing killings carried out in the open in front of guests, was not enough to establish legal responsibility without it. Elisabeth Willhaus was never charged or tried. She lived out the rest of her life in post-war Germany as an ordinary citizen. The question in the title deserves a straight answer. Her husband ran a camp where thousands died, and the scale of what he oversaw was larger than anything she did personally. But Gustav Willhaus operated inside a structure that gave him orders, ranks, and a function. Elisabeth had none of that. She had a rifle, an afternoon, a view, and a guest list. And the same absence of official position that made her killings entirely voluntary is the thing that made them unprosecutable. The system protected her twice, first by handing her the people below the balcony, then by never writing her name down. The men she killed are known to us only because other prisoners lived long enough to say their names out loud. Jakob Helfer, a 30-year-old from Sambor. That is the whole record. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe to Veil History and turn on notifications so the next one reaches you.